All right, guys, welcome back to our 2024 real estate market forecast. We are back. We are in studio with Mike Marconi. How many years have you been with us now on this, Mike?
I think this is the fifth.
The fifth. Oh, my God. It's crazy how time flies.
It is.
So I'm going to do the basic introduction, and then you can fill it in a little bit. So newly president of the Orange Coast title family of companies.
Yes.
When did you ascend to the president of all these companies?
It's been a year and a half now.
Okay, so it's been a little bit.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? It sounds like you're doing a little more traveling now and out and about.
I am doing a little bit more travel. Our family of companies encompasses close to 20 different companies throughout the United States. And on the residential resale side of it, we are mostly in the Western United States. And so the travel does become more prevalent, and I've been out in all of these operations, and but yet still very grounded in where we started, which is California and Southern California.
Right. So you're in the market.
Yes.
So we were briefly talking earlier, and this forecast, and again, I repeat myself a lot with the forecast. Initially, when we were doing this, the whole purpose was kind of an economic thing. I would have Chris Thornburg come in, some economists come in, and we'd sit back and say, well, what do these guys think is going to happen? I use that as part of my business plan to say, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And then over the last many, many years, we've kind of done a dual approach with our forecast. It's been the market forecast economic side, and then I've started to bring in the industry people, which I consider myself an industry. I'm a real estate guy. I'm not an economist. And the mortgage people come in, and then of course the title folks come in. So you are what I consider on the industry side. Maybe not so much on the forecast, but to me, it's all together. You may have an opinion on where things are going. If you want to share it today, by all means, we can do that. But you got my attention earlier. We spoke for just a few minutes before we sat down. So you're traveling mostly the West Coast,
right?
Not just in Southern California. So are you seeing things differently in other parts of the West Coast than what you see in California? It's specifically with what the market's doing, transaction volume, open orders, whatever it happens to be. How do you feel? Is this year shaping up the way you had hoped? Better, worse?
Well, I mean, I think that the year has actually started off fairly nicely.
Okay.
I think we track transaction count, which is a little bit about what you talked about. And I mean, I get down very granular in all of our operations, and we look at open orders per day, because basically that's an indicator to us not only of what's going on in the market, but how are we trending to the market? And so I look at that on a fairly regular basis as an indicator of how things are going.
Right.
Now, specifically to the question that you're asking, there are differences by state. There are even differences in kind of micro regions inside of state, depending upon on what's going on in those markets and what's the demographic of those markets. So if you look at California, it's a bit of a bumpy road, if you will. On the one hand, the transaction counts have been rising through the beginning of this year, and they've been rising for the first 3 months quite nicely. They seem to have leveled a bit, and we don't necessarily have the spring bump that we've got going on in California that we did. April kind of cooled a little bit.
Yep.
May a little bit, even some from that. Now, when I say cooled, I'm not talking about bombing. I'm just talking about basically cooling a little bit.
Right.
And it got my attention as it relates to wanting to make sure that we're still on point in terms of our transaction gathering. Now, so that's kind of a little bit of a global look. I have found, for example, that Nevada has not had as much of that up and down as maybe California has.
Okay.
And yet kind of the contrast to that, because we're also up in the state of Washington, that might be a little bit more volatile than what's going on in California. So it really is very region specific, and I mentioned a little bit about that it's also area specific. Like, for example, in Southern California, I'm finding that the Inland Empire, for example, has been very up and down.
Yeah.
It's been great in the beginning of the year, and yet it's had the most cooling that's taken place. And I think some of that is interest rate related and maybe a little bit more specific out there in terms of affordability.
Yeah, it feels like it's almost, you don't want to blame everything on interest rates, but it feels like it's interest rates, because you can track it, which, by the way, you said this last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. One of the reasons I like talking to you about market trends, there's not many industries that track it daily.
Right.
I mean, you guys truly are like, how many open orders did we get? And I'm assuming you probably even have it by segment. What's IE doing compared to Orange County compared to the low desert, whatever it happens to be? And I'm a data guy, but I'm like, man, that's real. I mean, that's like real time. So, I mean, I really think if you want to know what's going on, talk to the title folks, because, I mean, I track it. I mentioned you earlier, I'll be at my sales meeting and I know what my numbers are, and I'll quiz the lenders, how many, loan applications have you taken this month, this week, and then I'll quiz Annette or Gloria with Orange Coast, and they know they got to be honest with me, because I'll call you out. I'm like, really? You guys everything's great and it's just pie in the sky? Am I really underperforming that badly? And then normally the sales edge will come off. And by the way, they're always honest with me, but frankly, sometimes the lenders that I talk to, they're salespeople.
Right.
I'm a sales guy.
Right.
But I'm like, this isn't a sales meeting. This is business planning for me. I really need to know, is business good, flat, up, down, whatever it happens to be. So that daily tracking, I really, really like that. But getting back to the interest rate thing, it feels like so much of it has been tied to interest rates. Because when we were talking earlier this year, when rates were pulling down, and there was all this discussion about, hey, no more hikes, we're going to see 6 cuts from the Fed. I saw our transaction count literally track with that positive news issue in a positive direction. And then when that started to pull back a little bit, we're not going to get rate cuts. And not only are we not getting rate cuts at the Fed level, we're actually truly seeing 30-year fixed mortgage rates start to go back up, and the bond markets, was below 4, and then it was back up to 4.7. I think it's 100% what's happening with the consumer. Do you see anything other than interest rates that's causing that fluctuation?
Well, I mean, maybe I would answer that with a yes, but I'd like to make a comment on the interest
Sure.
rate, because it is the overriding factor of what's happening. And you described it perfectly as far as the interest rates, and then just sort of the feel of a buyer, and really a seller for that matter too, because the seller's going to be a buyer in their up leg. But the tracking of interest rates was having a lot to do with just the mentality and the positive vibe around transactions, right?
Yep.
And so as the talk was that, as you mentioned, there were going to be rate drops over the course of the year, it was leading to positivity in the marketplace. There was maybe come around March where we thought maybe the first change might take place,
Yep.
and it didn't happen.
Yep.
And so you saw a little bit of a hold going on with transactions. They didn't dive, but they weren't rising like you might expect in a March market. But then I think that buyer demand, which is still quite strong, influenced people to think, okay, I've heard so much about rates that maybe I'll go into a transaction, buy now, refi in 6 months. And so they went in with some creative loans that maybe weren't fixed, right?
Yeah.
Now, but unfortunately, and this goes back to just the what I call fragility in the market with buyer and seller. Unfortunately, then as news came out that maybe we weren't going to have all of these rate cuts that we were talking about, suddenly you've got a little bit of the same fragility and fear going on, where buyers aren't reacting and sellers aren't listing. So
Yeah, the fragility with the interest rates, I feel that. I see that. And it's a confidence level. And I don't know, I think I'm probably obsessed with watching the markets. I've been talking about Chairman Powell for so long. I've never talked about a Federal Reserve chair more in the last 2 years than I have in the prior 30 years. But I feel myself getting caught up with it. I get the enthusiasm. Hey, we're going to get rate cuts. We're going to get this. And the people I've been listening to have been projecting lower interest rates now pretty much since the beginning of the year, even going into last year. And they are good, quality, trusted people looking at great data. And it hasn't quite panned out.
Right.
And I was sitting yesterday with Chris Sorensen with PRMG Mortgage, and I love Chris, and he's a big data guy. And he had said something that Bruce Norris had said, that we're looking at these charts, and in the past, these charts were somewhat predictive, and now they're not, because it's just different.
Right.
Coming out of COVID, the injection of all this capital into the market, rates going from 3% to darn near 8%. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. So what are you guys thinking at OCT for the rest of this year? I mean, incrementally better numbers, flat, same?
Well, I think that by and large, 2024 is going to be a good year.
Yep.
I think that there's going to be continued demand, and I think there's going to be continued transaction. I think that if you take a look at how we are forecasting, and you, again, kind of look back to what took place in the second half of 2023, where there was huge market change.
Yep.
What I see instead is probably a build that we've built, and then transaction count maybe rising a little bit during the summer, and then plateauing a bit, but not really dropping like it did at the end of last year. So I think by and large, there's a great opportunity in the market, but that word opportunity leads me to a lot of the things that we're trying to teach our own reps, because I think we've been, and we mentioned a little bit when we got talking before we were meeting earlier, about the fact that we're trying to help the way we give data to realtors. And we're trying to basically, instead of just giving them data and saying, here, have at it, we're trying to segment that into the different ways that they would go after and try to make an impression on the homeowner. In other words, saying, hey, here's people that are recently divorced, and there's a script for that. And then rather than just giving it in a large lump sum, trying to help them out in terms of, because the more transactions you folks do, the more opportunities we get as well.
Well, we're truly in it together. And this is a transaction business. And to the degree that you guys have data, which, let's face it, you've got data, and you help the real estate agent community utilize that data better or at all. I mean, the reality is so many agents out there aren't doing anything with anything. They go into the MLS periodically. But you're right, in a market like this, people are dying. People are getting divorced. You've got financial situations, job transfers, whatever it happens to. There's still a marketplace.
Correct.
So, I mean, I know at heart I'm a sales guy, and I think you got.
I feel like I am as well.
Well, I don't know if you are, but I know your dad is.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, this is a sales business. So, and again, it's also a market share business. So we got to sit back and say, how are we going to elevate ourselves, even in a more difficult market, to capture our more than fair share? And that's kind of what I've been telling my agents as we are going through. We're not going to, unless you have a comment on it, we don't have to talk about the NAR lawsuits and the commission stuff. And there's a little bit of drama going on the real estate industry right now, and it's going to impact. It's going to have an impact on the industry. But I think like with any business, the agents who are top-notch and they have a product and they know their value are going to excel, and they're going to do better. I'm assuming you would probably say the same thing about how you guys operate.
I do. I mean, I don't necessarily have a comment on the lawsuit from the NAR perspective, other than there seems to be a lot of concern at that with some of our folks, that they hear it from agents that maybe traditionally did mostly buyer work.
Right.
And my take on that is that, like you said just a second ago, success is going to be based upon those that are willing to work and fight their way through it and kind of come up with ways to get around the obstacles, as opposed to being completely stymied by that.
Right.
So I think you might see some separation with folks that might exit the business that don't really have that stick-to-itiveness. But then that's probably better for those that really want to get it done.
Well, the level of professionalism in our business has struggled for a while. And even with all the drama associated with this, I think we're going to come out better. I think it's going to make us better as an industry. There's going to be some folks that are going to come out of this maybe not as well as they could. And frankly, there'll be people exiting the business, but it is what it is. On the transaction side, I'm just so obsessed with this. So you had mentioned, which I believe 100% is true, there's actually a lot of buyer demand out there. There is truly more buyer demand than we have supply. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about this for decades.
Plus, we're seeing that with price.
Frankly.
What's going on with prices and transactions right now.
Well, and if you were on, which I've never been, actually I want to say I've never been. I have not been in the camp that, the market's too hot, it's overheated, property values are going to collapse. That's a very 2006, 7, 8 mentality. A lot of people are just stuck and frozen in that window of time. Can you make an argument? Affordability and all that. Oh my gosh, by the way, I'm doing my market snapshot right after this is done. And be interesting, you guys, I think you guys track this. Median price, I track 4 counties, LA, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Orange. In all 3 counties except LA, and LA's just a smidge below, all-time high median prices, all-time. So, we pulled back a little bit when interest rates were going nuts, and we backfilled all that, and now we are all-time high, which then gets back, well, geez, Lance, well, that's too high. That's too much, which is crazy because we got all-time high prices, and we certainly have interest rates at a level that we haven't seen in a long time. I mean, knocking on 8, pulled back down to 7. But the bottom line is the demand is still there.
Yep.
The demand is still there. So you got that demand and low supply. It's a safety net to values. And best I can tell, we're not building enough houses, even we're close, to do that, to outstrip the demand. And of course, the builders wouldn't do that anyway.
No.
Builders are never going to get ahead of it. So, but gosh, it'd just be nice if we had a magic wand and we could sit back and say, how can we create more transactions? How can we get basically just more movement in the market? You mentioned Vegas. My brother just moved to Vegas. I'm closing escrow today on a property in Upland. They're moving to Colorado. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just a handful
Yeah,
of
we see
examples.
we see some movement in and out of our various states that we're in, but at the moment we're seeing a lot of influx of folks into both of our markets in Nevada, both Vegas and First Centennial.
Right.
Colorado is certainly a place where people are moving. Utah's
Right,
another.
you're doing business in Colorado.
We're in Colorado.
Those states. Okay.
Utah's another one where we've got a nice operation. We're seeing an influx of folks into there as well.
Right.
So there still is that movement going on. You'd think that everybody is leaving California, and from what you read, but that's not the case.
No.
There are just people that are selectively looking to do that for
Yeah.
one reason or another.
Yeah, like even my brother. I mean, it's frankly with him it was taxes, probably taxes and politics more
Yeah.
than anything else.
Yeah.
You know, he loves the state. I don't. He's in Nevada. He's never lived more than 3 miles away from the ocean in his life.
Right. So this will be an adjustment for him at that point.
I think the adjustment's going to be he's going to be heading west here.
Yeah.
Not much longer from now. He says, I'll have to pay the taxes and I'm coming back.
Right.
Yeah. So what's going on? Open-ended question. Anything exciting going on at OCT? Anything different? I mean, I know you're trying to provide some products and stuff out to the agents, or maybe a little.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. We're really quite proud of the fact that on March 11th, we celebrated 50 years from our organization in terms of our anniversary.
Very nice.
And you know, the average age of corporations, because I went and looked this up for an article I wrote for within our company, is basically shrunk down to 18 years. That's usually the lifespan of corporations. So
And then they're done.
we're proud of celebrating 50 years. We're capitalizing on that. We think that the reason that we are able to do that is because, yes, we've got a lot of things that are features for our clients, but yet we're also really good at being a title company.
Yeah.
And I think that's critically important and not necessarily understood all the time, that you know we focus on risk elimination and solving problems and trying to figure out what's the possibility of that risk happening when we decide to close transactions. So the 50th anniversary has allowed us to elevate that concept in terms of bringing it back out to a topic of conversation. So we are doing that. We have broadened out the scope of some of our transactional things that we do for folks. Where that manifests itself, you mentioned a market snapshot. We have that on our app. That is something that we provide to folks that if you could put an address in, it'll give you demographic and market data on that.
Yep.
We've recently added to our app the ability to look at default products, which is another trigger that would be something that you'd want agents to go after. Now, we're not really finding that there's a lot of them, but it definitely is a conversation point that is something that we're bringing to the market.
But on the defaults. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Gloria, in my Claremont office or Covina office 2 days ago, and she said, "Hey, we got this new default product, which has been around forever, but the delivery of the information is like, okay, that's nice." And every time we talk about defaults, my agent's like, "Oh my God, where the foreclosure coming?"
Right.
No.
But
is there potentially some short sales in there, or is there a divorce in there, or is there some distress in there? No, just opportunity to go get it.
Yeah, I think that the reality is you're not going to see a huge market change around that because there's just too much equity that's built up.
Correct.
So there should be ways for people to fix their problem, if you will. But a lot of times when they get into that challenge, for whatever the reason is, it could be health related, it could be, like you mentioned, divorce, or whatever the reason they get into that challenge, they don't necessarily see their way out of it because you're right in the middle of the challenge.
No, they don't.
And that's where, a professional realtor that comes into that conversation can help them say, "Hey, look, I can help you in this process."
Yeah, I'm not even sure if you're aware of this with me, but I kind of made my bones doing REOs and foreclosures back in the 90s and then through the 2000s. And there were so many cases where I'd be like, if you had just called somebody, a year ago or 6 months ago, you wouldn't be here right now. But it's paralyzing, and I've been in financial trouble more than once in my life, and it's paralyzing.
Right.
So that's why, again, I think there's an opportunity for the realtors there. I want to go back to something that you said about 50 years with OCT, and by the way, I 100% agree. I'm paraphrasing. You guys do title insurance well. Okay, you're a great title insurance company. But I think it's different. I think you got another reason you've been in business so long, and you know this, and you're just maybe just too modest to say it. I don't know of any other company that I've done business with in this industry who takes better care of their people. And I don't mean you take good care of your customers. I mean actually your people, the employees and the staff at Orange Coast Title. It is the longevity within your organization is hands down. It is impressive.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up because it is a core value of ours.
Yep.
And I've had several opportunities where we've been recruiting folks and we've brought them into our corporate offices in Santa Ana. And we actually have a wall dedicated to all of the tenured employees that we have. And there are a handful of people that have been with us almost the entire time that Orange Coast has been open.
Right.
And we have quite a full wall worth of 20-year, 30-year, 40-year employees. And we very much believe in the concept that if they're happy employees and we take care of them, that they're going to in turn take care of the client and have a great experience during a transaction. And not just you as our client, but the consumer as the client as well.
Right.
We definitely have a high focus on the consumer as well.
Well, to the degree that the consumer never gets to see that, more than likely. But to the degree that I'm also a consumer of your product through the real estate office and stuff, and I don't think most of even the agents get to see it, although maybe they'll see a title rep or something out in the field. It's like, wow, you're 30 years with OCT or whatever it happens to be. But it's truly impressive. I mean, I look at that and I look at how I run my organization with my sons, because we're also family owned and operated, and I worked with my dad. Sound familiar?
Like I'm doing.
Sound familiar? But it's something. So I would attribute, in fact, yes, you guys are a great organization. You're well run and do title well as anybody. But I don't know of any other company at all that basically has the longevity of the employees and the staff.
I greatly appreciate that because I think you're right. It is a key part of the reason why we've accomplished those 50 years.
Big part of who you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's try to do some predictions here, if you want to. If not, we can leave them aside and we'll let the economists deal with that. So you kind of said, hey, you anticipate 2024 to be a good year. I mean, here we are in first week of May. We got some time. California Association of Realtors, and this would be really interesting because I think they might have been a little overshot a little bit, are forecasting in state of California. I believe it's 23% increase in transaction volume. 23% from 23 to 24. When I saw that forecast, I was like, okay, I'll take that.
Can we pencil that in?
I want to put it in a Sharpie,
right.
Permanent. I think we all would. Now, by the way, that original, which they haven't modified, by the way, that original forecast came out in October of last year, so it's now 6-7 months old, and now we've got 4 months into the year. That feels a little heavy to me as far as that large of an increase in transaction volume, although the optimist in me says let's do it. What do you have a thought on? Is you like that number, or you think it's going to be more like 10%?
I mean, I don't want to come at that and feel like I'm trying to cut it. I think when it was put forth, it had a lot of ambition to it.
Yeah.
I will think that maybe we shave that a touch, but I am thinking that we're going to be above 15% in terms of our
increased transaction volume.
Yes, and the reason I say that is when you're comparing it year over year, there was kind of a robust first half of 23 like we talked about, but a very different second half.
Yep.
I see this year as a little bit more flat, and maybe not exceptionally white hot, but flat from a good perspective. And add that all up over the course of the year, I think we're going to see probably a 15% increase in transactions.
And you'd be happy with that?
I would be happy with that.
Yeah, I'd be
happy
with
and we
that.
do a pretty detailed month by month forecast out through the end of every year, and then every month we adjust it based upon what's happened. And so we coming in, interestingly enough, right around 15% increase in our transaction count and then our revenue accordingly.
Okay.
And so I do think that there is going to be an increased year-over-year market.
Well, but you've got the boots on the ground, but a lot of those boots that your people are looking at are my boots, and the agents and the realtors.
Right.
This is the part that I'd be curious if you agree with this. So getting back to the interest rates, because you can literally kind of just track the increased interest in the open escrows, open title orders based upon rates. We're now, today's May 9th, 2024. 3 years ago, we're interest rate of 7, let's call it 7.25, between 7 and 7.25, 30-year fixed today. 3 years ago, we were at 3-ish. A year ago, we were at 6-ish. And anyway, so we've been tracking that. I think that shock of going from that 3 up to that 6 or 7 rate, I think that's already baked into the pie now. And if I'm a buyer, I'm trying to put myself in the buyer's mind. I want to buy a house. I need to buy a house. I didn't buy a house. I didn't buy one during COVID because I thought there was going to be a crash, or I didn't think values were going to go up. If I had known values were going to go up 40% in 2 years during COVID, I would have bought a house on day one. I didn't. Well, then they went up 40%. Oh, I missed it. I missed the opportunity. I'll never be able to buy a house, so I don't buy a house. And then, and values are going to crash. Well, they don't, okay? And then rates have gone up, and they did, and then they come back. I think a lot of the consumers who have been looking at this market for the last 2-3 years, kind of, I should have bought, but I didn't. I was afraid because it was going to crash, or interest rates, or maybe affordability, which of course is a factor. I think they're tired of waiting. I do. I think it's like, all right, if I'm going to buy a house today and I'm going to have to pay 7%, or God forbid we slide back below 7 and we have something with a 6 handle, I think there's a lot of buyers out there that 2 years ago, the thought of buying a house with a 6 or 7% interest rate never would have done it. And I think today they're like, hey, this is the new world. This is the new normal. I just think we just need some stability. If we can just stop these 1% shifts every, and this nonsense in the news. So my thought is we might be able to hit that 25% increase in sales. If we could just sit back, if I could wave a magic wand and say, okay, interest rates are going to be 7% for the next 2 years. That's what they're going to be. Just deal with it. I think people would plan ahead and they go. They just, okay, fine, I'm going to go out, I'm going to buy my house.
I agree with what you're saying. I think enough time has transpired that people now are a little bit more accustomed to what the rates actually are, so there's not the shock of that any longer. I think that, unfortunately, we start thinking about our industry, you can't really put blinders on because we're right in the middle of a news cycle and an economic cycle and a political cycle that's got a lot of information out there.
It sure does.
And unfortunately, as it comes out, that tends to also hinder people's mentality.
Yep.
But you said a point to me about missing out, and I genuinely believe that buyers, especially young first-time buyers, they now have gotten into that that proverbial saying, that FOMO, they fear of missing out. I think they definitely are afraid of missing out.
Yeah.
And I think that's a positive thing because it means they're going to get off the fence and they're going to do transactions.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of with you. I think that if we could just get volatility out of that conversation and just say, okay, yeah, this is what we got for a period of time.
Right.
I think we'd all figure it out.
Right. And the forecasters on interest rates, again, not to obsess with that, but we're a little bit above 7. Everybody pretty much across the board is projecting the rates to be below 7 between now and December 31st.
Yep.
If that happens, which again, getting back to this transaction number, because at the end of the day, I know they're important to you. I mean, goodness gracious, right? We need transactions to keep the lights on. We need transactions to keep the lights on. But I think it's possible that we could see a north of a 20% increase in transaction volume if we get the volatility out of that.
I'm right there with you.
Right.
I'm right there with you. I think it is possible, and the conditions are such, especially in California, that there's plenty of demand.
Right.
And frankly, a lack of supply. So therefore, it is possible to see those transaction counts rise to that level.
Well, and as much as I don't like doing business in election years,
right,
we're in it.
Right.
I mean, man, are we in it like we've never been in it before?
Right.
But and there's not supposed to be that sort of influence within the markets. Just to say it's an election year, let's do what we can to help a certain party succeed. But the reality is, if there's any of that, we should see lower interest rates, which again will hopefully trigger into, like I say, I like what you said. If we could just get rid of the volatility.
Yes.
Or at least lessen the volatility.
Yes.
So, all right, Mike. Well, here we are
Appreciate
again,
it.
2024. You're going to come back next year?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
I greatly appreciate the invite.
Well, I love having you. So again, our market forecast, we are just a few weeks away. We're shooting Mike's interview in studio today. Today is May 9th. Our forecast is a little less than 3 weeks from now. May 29th, we're going to be at the, I'm not sure exactly what building. We'll get that information out to you, but at Cal Baptist University, right off the 91 freeway in Magnolia and Riverside. We look forward to seeing you all there. And again, Mike, appreciate you.
it.
All righty,
Thank you
my
so much,
friend.
Lance.
And we'll see you on May 29th.